All right, we're a minute past 1 o'clock here on the East Coast, so let's get started. Hello and welcome everybody to today's webinar, which is Best Practices for Auditing Active Directory. My name is Nate Sorrentino, and joining me here today is Brad Bussey, who's our Director of Product Management here at STEALTHbits. He's actually going to be the one taking you through today's presentation. I'm just here to do a little bit of the pre-webinar housekeeping. As I'm sure you've noticed, right now everyone in attendance has their line muted, so if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to just type it into the little chat box that you see there on the right. This webinar is meant to be interactive, so we welcome any and all questions or comments that you may have, and we'll do our best to answer them as we receive them, but I just want to make you aware that there will be a QA period at the end of the webinar as well. I also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded tomorrow, so tomorrow you should be receiving an email from GoToWebinar with a link to the recording. Feel free to watch it again or share it out with whomever you like. If tomorrow at the end of the day you check your inbox and don't see it, I recommend just taking a little peek in your spam or junk folder. We found that sometimes these little automated emails can get caught up in there. That's all from me right now. I don't want to take up any more of your time than necessary, so Brad, let me pass it off to you.
All right. Thanks, Nate. And hey, everybody. This is Brad Bussey, Director of Product Management here at STEALTHbits. And thanks again for joining us to learn a little more about best practices for auditing Active Directory. So just to get us kicked off here, I've got the following agenda. So I thought it'd be helpful to start off with a brief introduction to STEALTHbits, and then we'll get actually into the topic. So we'll start with a little background on our view of the problems we aim to solve, some basic education on the technology we've built to solve those problems, and then we'll get right into what the solution looks like. We'll save some time for Q&A at the end, like Nate said, but let's keep this interactive anyway. So if you've got a question or you think of something, just go ahead and type it in while I'm going through this. And I like to keep these pretty short. I know when I attend webinars and they're like an hour, I kind of lose my place and lose track of what I'm even watching. So I try to keep these at 30 minutes or even a little bit less. So who are we here at STEALTHbits? You know, at the end of the day, STEALTHbits is a data security software company. So we exist to govern and control access to your data, as well as detect threats associated with accessing of that data. The information we care about most and specialize in here at STEALTHbits is your unstructured data. So all of those files sitting out on file shares, SharePoint sites, and other endpoints. And in order to secure all this data, we naturally spend a lot of time understanding, managing, and securing Active Directory. And that's the thing responsible for authorizing users to access those resources in the first place. And in the end, it really is all about credentials and data. So let's start setting the stage for some award-winning software. I like to break down the STEALTHbits solution into a three-pronged approach to data security. So at the core of what we do is administration, operations, compliance, and security, with emphasis in the three areas of data access governance, system security, and Active Directory management. So data governance is where we recently captured a MVP award for information security software. You need to know who has access to data in your organization and how your employees and contractors are actually using that data. Our data access governance fundamentals encompass the ability to reduce data access and permissions with the goal of reaching least privileged access. So we accomplish this through understanding access, permissions, activity, sensitive data discovery, entitlement reviews, and self-service, with key capabilities around things like stale data cleanup and real-time change and access monitoring, also for Active Directory, by the way. The second area is system security, and this focuses on strengthening foundational security. So this includes privileged account discovery and governance, security configuration baseline analysis, best practice alignment, things like indicator of compromise, security and configuration assessments, and local privileged account auditing. The third area, Active Directory management, is with the intent to simplify administration, and security of Active Directory through things like attack detection, user behavior analytics, object cleanup, toxic condition analysis and remediation, rollback and recovery, vulnerability assessment, object permission analysis, as well as real-time change in access monitoring. So we also spend time helping you understand Microsoft and industry best practices for overall operations and security of your directory. So what is Active Directory auditing? So we approach Active Directory auditing with the focus on assessing, analyzing, reporting, remediating, and protecting your directory. So StealthBits has over 40 data collectors, several of which look deeply into Active Directory to inspect its state and compile an inventory of all objects and attributes. We then collect and analyze the data and organize it into structured data. And once the data is available in structured format, we report on the collections and identify key use cases. So I get asked a lot of the time, like, why do we audit Active Directory? I mean, organizations are typically looking to answer questions. Some of the common questions are, when was the last time did Brad log in? And honestly, what I want to know is why everyone wants to know when I last logged in. But anyway, what workstation is he using? What files did he access? What accounts did he use? Or has he actually used any of the provisioned access he's been given? I mean, some of the questions lead us into an important area of Active Directory, which are toxic conditions. So what are toxic conditions? So objects in Active Directory can be present in specific states, depending on conditions within the directory. So while Active Directory might not come out and flash lights and set up alarms, for most toxic conditions, they can impact the proper function and usefulness of your directory. Some of the common toxic conditions we report on include things like circular nesting. And these are groups that can become nested within themselves. And this can cause serious issue with some applications that are unable to break the loop of searching for group memberships. And you'll notice these when the applications crash. And it's difficult to determine why they crashed until you see the looping for yourself. And I've seen this in countless environments. Then we've got domain controller logon rights. Not all accounts can log on to domain controllers, but the ones that can should be identified before all others. Once on a domain controller, lots of good or bad things can happen. And things like empty groups. Empty groups are typically just taking up space in your directory and could potentially provision access to sensitive areas of your environment like file shares, applications, and Active Directory organizational units. All it takes is adding a user or a group to that empty group, and the next thing you know, that user or group could have unrestricted access to something. And directly assigned permissions. Groups should be the main way permissions are granted for easier control. Think people doing things like role-based access. Could you imagine having to manage each individual and the access that they're allowed to have on every object in the domain? I mean, most permissions should be inherited from some kind of a parent object. So we definitely want to know which ones aren't following best practices and then change them so they are. And then we have stale objects. Users that have not logged in to Active Directory in over, let's just say, 90 days are generally considered stale. It is best practice to disable user accounts when a user is on something like a long-term leave so that they don't get flagged as stale. Stale users represent a risk because they could potentially belong to maybe a separated employee that may still have access to your systems. Imagine an administrator that's left the organization, maybe they joined a competitor. What kind of damage could they do logged in with an account that should have been disabled when they were separated? Then we have over-provisioned access. Did an account get copied from another account when it was created and now has more permissions or access than required? I still see this all the time, even with identity and access management systems, HR systems. they're still cloning Active Directory accounts for whatever reason. And it's a good idea to take a look at if the provisioned access and permissions have been used, and then remove them. And honestly, Stealth Audit can show you how to do that. And I think most importantly, like, why is any of this even important? And the main reason is attackers are after Active Directory accounts. I mean, accounts, even unprivileged ones, can still read critical objects in the directory. And it gives attackers kind of that way forward, where to attack, where to focus. And not to mention, the hundreds of attacks that could spoof a SID, grant a golden ticket, pass the hash, etc. What they are all after is a user account to conduct the attack with. Remember, I said before, it's all about credentials and data. And an Active Directory is your authentication and authorization hub, thus the focus from attackers on leveraging toxic conditions. For example, the longer a password goes without being changed, the greater the risk that that password is known. Maybe it was written down, maybe it was involved in another attack, or maybe you use the same passwords for internal website and applications, and it's the same as your internal passwords. And I just saw this with the LinkedIn breach. It's shown that this is very relevant. Hackers today are going through that list that they pulled from LinkedIn and testing it against thousands of other sites. And excessive access. This is the leading cause of breaches. These breaches have been caused either by malicious intent, but they've also been from users accidentally using access inappropriately. Like I read something the other day about someone who received an email from their CEO asking for all of the W-2s in their organization. And the CEO never actually asked for that information. It was a spoofed email address. So not good for that employee or those affected by the attack. That's a really good example of spoofing right there. And now I've noticed with a lot of emails that I get from people, it will clearly say this email is coming from an internal source or an external source. I think a lot of that is coming from this one specific example. So now, the best practices for auditing Active Directory. A best practice is a method or technique that has consistently shown results. And those results are superior to those achieved with other means. And that is used as a benchmark. So in addition, a best practice can evolve to become better as improvements are discovered. And StealthBits has nearly 20 years of experience with Active Directory auditing, and we've refined that process considerably over time. So let's start by breaking down what you can do from an organizational perspective before we even get into the individual capabilities of our solution or any of the reports. I like to look at this as, how do I know what I'm going to fix unless I fully understand it? I should be getting an idea of what's out there. How many accounts do I have? How many groups? Are they privileged? What kinds of toxic conditions exist? Who has permissions to domain controllers and organizational units? I need to start begin scanning and mapping the environment and understanding if I have a good security posture. Do things like know the unknowns. And without scanning Active Directory, basically everything is unknown. Really, what you're after is scanning now, because this will provide you a map to help you triage things later. And once you've surveyed and analyzed your environment, it's time to start thinking about triage. You have visibility now into risky areas like privileged access to Active Directory. Focus on most critical and valuable AD objects first. Things like accounts or groups that have access to group policy, ones that are in domain enterprise admin, anything that's giving you that privileged access to the directory. And then identify and remediate things like large groups. We call this open access, where we examine the groups that have the most access globally. And think of these like domain users, everyone, or that popular group where it's like the name of your domain underscore users, and that's where everybody's stuck into. And finally, focus on mitigating security and compliance problems related to elevated access and that popular direct access. I mean, operations is important, but security needs to be part of the discussion going forward. Get the right stakeholders involved. You know, the right stakeholders are critical when you have identified areas of concern. Don't think that you need, executive sponsorship. But don't get me wrong, I mean, that definitely helps. But instead, look for support from the business. I can't tell you how many IT projects I've seen fail to launch because they lacked support from the business. Keep in mind, when it comes to local systems, administrators, you'll be dealing with a unique mix of business owner, admins, and custodians. I'm often asked, how do I find stakeholders if I don't even know who they might be? And this is where you leverage your collected and analyzed data. You should be able to determine who they are based on permission scans, the discovered content, and the activity. Who's actually accessing Active Directory, systems, applications, services. And now that you have the sign-off from the business, you can start locking things down. Some recommendations here are removing global access whenever possible, assign owners and have them review who has access to their data, systems, or credentials. Align access with the needs of the organization. Think least privileged and delegated administration, and move towards self-service, possibly in conjunction with identity and access management or an identity and access governance project. And in the end, this will help you fix the problem. And in a minute, I'm going to show you several ways of identifying and fixing problems related to Active Directory and auditing as a whole. You should be able to walk away from this session with an idea of what should happen next. And speaking of what should happen next, what I've found is that everything in security is a cycle. I mean, step 5 is going to lead you back to step 1 because security is always evolving and changing. So what's next in priority? Have you identified that next organizational unit, group policy, or account for auditing? Maybe you need to remediate access or figure out if your system is storing Active Directory passwords in memory. This still happens. I mean, don't just tackle the most critical items. Put this in a repeatable, secure process. So now let's take a look at Stealth Audit for Active Directory. What I did is I captured a number of my favorite reports in the next couple slides. I've tried a live demo here a couple of times, but I always find that coming back to static reports is just easier for the audience to consume. And then you can come back later when you're writing up a justification on why you want to buy some software. So let's start with the Active Directory summary. So this is probably my favorite report for Active Directory. Lots of stuff going on here. As you can see, we're able to audit multiple domains and give you a roll-up of specific domain stats like users, groups, computers. You can at a glance see how many users, how many are disabled, how many groups and computers. We also go into detail on potentially stale objects, password stat, like no password expiration, incomplete user attributes, and users without a manager assigned. I mean, I can tell you what the domain looks like from a top level in a single report, and then we can drill down into each of these areas when we want more information. So if I were to then select something like toxic conditions, I would drill down, and you heard me talking about toxic conditions earlier, but this report you're looking at is our circular nesting report. You can quickly identify which groups are nested, and most importantly, at which level the nesting occurs. In this example, we can see that it's in the third level of nesting, and you can kind of follow the groups down and see how they're nested within each other. Something pretty useful. And then privileged accounts. We don't just aggregate and collect data from Active Directory. Remember I said we have over 40 data collectors. So we also do the same thing for all of your systems. Think Windows XP, Windows 7, Windows 10, Server 2008 R2, all the way up to 16. What this report is doing is looking at all the systems where these users have local administrator rights. So this is nice because I'm sure all of you have been asked, do you know which accounts in your environment are privileged? How about the last time that privileged account's password was changed? So here it looks like our SB Restore account is winning with 1,807 days since it was last changed, and I'm really glad this is a test environment. But the bottom line is we can help you answer the question of what accounts are privileged, not only in this report, but we've got a couple of other ones. I just picked some of the best to show you. Sensitive security groups. So the sensitive security groups report rides on the coattails of privileged accounts. And by doing a deeper assessment on which accounts are in sensitive Active Directory groups like domain admins, enterprise admins, and the effective memberships those users and groups have. So notice we also show you how long it's been since those accounts have logged on, if they're disabled, and how old the password is. Then we've got DC logon rights. So I like to show who has access to what. When we consider Active Directory, one of the most important things to know is who has direct access to your domain controllers. Sure, some secure DC access, and they do it via disabling RDP, maybe limiting logons to a console in the server room, or having to go through some kind of privileged session management. But what none of that really tells you is which users and groups can actually perform the function of logging on to a domain controller. So the report you're looking at gives you the exact information of who has access to log on to your domain controllers. And is the account particularly risky? Maybe the password hasn't been changed in a while. And oh, look, there's a service account. That's not right. No way should that even be able to log on to the domain controller. And Active Directory has an advanced view in Active Directory users and computers, as well as a way to look at the schema and other areas within ADSI Edit. So I get nervous anytime I turn on the advanced view or go poking around in ADSI Edit looking for what we call extended permissions. So what we've done in our AD Extended Rights report is give you the information you're looking for, that historically you had to turn on those different views and poke around in the schema looking for. And we do it in one report without having to make any changes to ADUC or ADSI. So as you can see, I'm looking at a host, I'm getting good information, and the next thing you're thinking of is, well, what does the filtering look like? So let's say I want to go down and get more detail on the rights we just collected. We also have a drill down view with our AD permissions report where you can get information like directly assigned permissions, full analysis and reporting on permissions granted to organizational units, groups, users, computers. Lots of good information here. Think of this as being able to say, what does Brad have access to in Active Directory? Everybody's always picking on me. And then getting a breakdown of reports. Here's one that's not so common, but it's pretty important to understand. Honestly, the most common account that we all forget or don't remember the password for is our DSRM account. This report lets you know if that account can log on to domain controllers without the domain controller being in recovery mode. This is a thing. I see this all the time. And this can represent a significant risk to your organization if it can log on interactively. I mean, who has that password? Is it written down? Is somebody that's been separated from the company, could they still know that? We have a lot of best practice reports like this. This is one of the ones I like to show for Active Directory. And then password status. You've heard me talk about passwords numerous times during this webinar. So I figured the second to last report I showed you would have to do specifically with passwords. So this report is great for determining the accounts with potential issues. I also have a report that can break down what your password policies are and if they're being circumvented or followed diligently. As you can see, this environment is a mess, and that's why it's test, right? And the final report, our user token size. So over the years, as an Active Directory administrator, I've come across my fair share of, hey Brad, it takes me 15 minutes to log onto this workstation. I'm going to log in, let's go grab a coffee while that's happening. And what I've come to find in my time with AD is that most often it's related to token size and group policy. The more groups that people belong to really has an impact on how long it takes to log in, how big that token is, how many group policies are being applied. And being able to get all of this information in one place is huge as far as determining what's taken that PC or server so long to log in. So now we've reached our question and answer portion. So Nate, how are we doing? You got any questions out there?
Yeah, we got a few. Let me start off with this one here. So does STEALTHbits communicate over LDAPs or some form of secure communications when accessing AD or file shares?
Yeah, so we secure our communications. You can also have it audit and report on LDAP directories specifically. Everything we do can either be secured or unsecured, but I like to promote secured communication whenever possible. So it's all configurable within our data collectors.
Okay. Are your reports customizable?
Yes. So our reports are easily customizable. We have a professional services team that does that often, and I have a bunch of customers that have done that themselves. You just need a little bit of skill in SQL and just some basic design experience, and definitely simple to do.
Is your software available in the cloud?
Yeah, so I wouldn't think of it as software as a service yet. It's more of infrastructure as a service. So let's say you have an AWS or an Azure virtual machine sitting up in the cloud. You can install Stealth Audit in that environment, and you can audit whatever else you have in that cloud instance, or you can then have it monitor things that you have on-prem. And vice versa. If you've got it on-prem, you can monitor assets that you have in the cloud.
Okay. Does this solution utilize agents placed on the DC that report to an on-premise box?
So this is the only part about this that I've talked about that would require an agent is activity. Now, if you're looking for real-time change monitoring, a part of this solution, which is called Stealth Intercept, would require an agent on the domain controllers. And that would get you, again, kind of that real-time, the ability to protect and block organizational units, different kinds of assets. So depending on which part of the solution you deploy will give you an idea of what kind of an agent you would need to install. So everything I showed you today is agentless. We have a webinar coming up about Stealth Intercept where you can see a little bit about how the agents work and the kinds of information that we bring back for that part of the solution.
Okay. Where do you normally start with a customer? The most privileged accounts, people that have access to the most resources with sensitive data? Basically wondering where it would start if those are two examples.
So that's kind of a funny one because I would say yes. Those are both very important. I like to start with the privileged accounts and then work my way back into open access that everyone has. It kind of depends on what you're trying to secure and what you're concerned about. And if you're worried that somebody can get in and start doing surveying of their own, like a Mimikatz or something like that, where they're just looking for ways in to get a foothold, that's one way. But if you've got those privileged users and you maybe have a little concern that they have too much access or they're not using their access responsibly, then maybe you would want to start there. really depends on the use cases that you have, but I would do both as soon as possible.
Okay. Should all the servers I have in Stealth Intercept also be listed in Audit? For example, all DCs in Intercept should all also be added as servers in Stealth Audit?
Yeah, I definitely think so. We've got some capabilities where we can use information from Intercept and Audit together. And a lot of these best practices will be looking at registry keys, patches, configurations, things that Stealth Audit is very, very good at. So you'll definitely want both in Audit and in Intercept for those domain controllers specifically. Good use cases there that, if you want some information offline, I'd be happy to talk to you about some of the things that I've seen and some of the ideas that I've had for integrating the two solutions.
Okay, here's another one. Can we leverage our own PowerShell to create reports?
You can. We actually have a PowerShell data collector as well. So we can go out and gather information, or if you want to use it and then do some of those new visualizations in PowerShell, that's totally up to you and definitely possible. I've seen it both ways. Great questions, guys. This is really cool for me because so often I do these webinars and I present the content and we have like one question. So when I get a bunch of questions like this, that makes me excited. So thank you for being interactive. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, and still a few more in the queue here. Do either of these solutions provide data on systems/processes hitting the DC for authentications if the logging is set on the DC?
Yeah, if you have the logging set on the DC, we can grab that. We can also give you some unique information as well about maybe applications that you're wondering if they're hard-coded to talk to a specific domain controller. So we can look at those calls and that activity and tell you, hey, maybe this application is only talking to this domain controller. Or if you're getting ready to maybe do a domain consolidation and start collapsing applications, but you're kind of scared that somebody may have hard-coded something directly into the app, we can help you figure that out as well.
Okay, a gentleman here is saying he'd love to get more info. I'll let your rep know. On PowerShell, can you log an alert on the event ID 4866 command line execution with the passed argument using Intercept or Audit?
Well, I'm thinking the best use of that would be Audit. We've got a PowerShell, I'm going to call it job set now. And what it does is it will check in near real time any of those commands that are being run from workstations, servers, wherever. And that stuff gets logged, and we'll capture that and be able to tell you where it was being generated from, mainly with the idea of, like, if I am doing something on my workstation in PowerShell, no matter what it is, that's dangerous for everybody. You don't want me doing that. So we would be looking for specific commands, and it's something that you can customize the data collector to look for. So you can have it look specifically for those kinds of events or those kinds of calls, and then raise it to your attention that's happening.
Okay, we have one more for now. We'll see if any more come in, but is your reporting real time?
So good question. So I like to call it near real time. So it's collection based. So as often as you're collecting and doing deltas is as quickly as we can return data. If we're talking about Stealth Intercept, it's real time because it's grabbing it's hooking directly into LSASS, and it's looking at all of this as close to real time as possible.
All right, that's all I see in here for now, so I think we can wrap it up, and if anything else comes in towards the end, I'll let you know.
Awesome. So what's next? Here I like to offer up a demo. If there's something specifically that you want to see the product live, then we can set something up for you. More importantly, like, I spend a lot of time creating free trials, writing documents, writing data sheets, white papers. Like, I write a ton of our stuff. So grabbing a free trial of our Active Directory set, our ability to find open access, our ability to look at your local administrator group and find privileged accounts on all of your systems. We've got really good trials for that. We also have resources available so you can read some of that great content that we've created. And then, if you have any questions, we've got a contact us where we can get either you talking directly to a product manager or talking to somebody in support, pre-sales, or sales. I would encourage you to go out and just grab some of our white papers. We spend a lot of time on them, and I think they've got pretty good information on our product.
All right, we actually had just one more question come in, Brad. For the
Sure.
processes/systems monitoring piece, which solution would one look into?
So I would say to cover all of your bases, I would suggest Stealth Audit and Intercept together. They're made to really to work together, and I think with the line of questioning and the instancing that you're looking at, both would be appropriate. And honestly, I would like to take this offline with you. So Nate, if you could capture his or her email address, I'd like to follow up with you so we can get down exactly what you would be looking at. I'm not sure if you're an existing customer or new customer, so I just want to see where we're at.
Sure, no problem.
Awesome.
But yeah, I think we're good. I don't see anything else in the questions pane, so I think we can wrap it up for today.
All right. Well, from everybody here at StealthBits, thanks a lot for attending our webinar, and we'll see you again soon.
Yeah, thanks for all the questions. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.